What if the biggest lie in modern science isn't about flat Earth theories or anti-vaccine myths, but about Mars? What if the story we've been telling ourselves for decades, the one plastered on classroom walls and printed in science fiction novels, is not just wrong, but dangerously misleading? Here's the truth nobody wants to say out loud. We have largely solved the rocket problem. The engineers working on interplanetary propulsion have cracked, or are very close to cracking, nearly every major challenge involving thrust, fuel mass ratios, and trajectory windows. That part of the journey to Mars, it's manageable. What isn't manageable, what no amount of brilliant engineering has yet confronted with an honest answer, is what happens to the human body the moment it actually arrives. The real obstacle isn't getting to Mars, it's surviving it. For decades, we've been enchanted by a seductive narrative. We imagine a powerful rocket cutting through the void, a crew of brave astronauts touching down on rusty red soil, pressurized habitats rising slowly from the dust, hydroponic gardens producing food, and humanity planting its second flag on a second world. It is a beautiful vision. It is cinematic. It is deeply human in its optimism. And from a purely physical and biological standpoint, it is one of the most misleading stories that modern science communication has ever allowed to take root. Because the universe has not simply made Mars inconvenient for human life, it has made Mars actively, mathematically, and almost elegantly hostile to everything that keeps a human being alive and functioning. To understand exactly why, you need to step away from rockets and habitats for a moment and think about something far more intimate, the architecture of your own body. Your skeleton, your muscles, your cardiovascular system, your endocrine chemistry, none of these are passive structures. They are dynamic, continuously self-regulating systems that exist in a precise and ongoing conversation with the physical environment around them. They are calibrated down to the cellular and molecular level by 4 billion years of evolution on the surface of a massive gravitational body. Take them off that body, place them somewhere fundamentally different, and the conversation breaks down. The architecture begins to fail not because of a design flaw, but because the environment it was built for no longer exists around it. Consider an analogy that captures this with almost painful precision. Picture the most sophisticated glass submarine ever engineered. Its designers are structural geniuses. Every curve of its hull, every millimeter of its reinforced walls has been calculated to resist the crushing external pressure of the deepest ocean trench on Earth. At that depth, under millions of tons of water pressing inward from every direction, the submarine is in perfect equilibrium. The external force and the internal structural resistance are mathematically matched. The vessel holds together with a kind of quiet mechanical poetry. Now take that identical submarine, same materials, same geometry, same engineering, and set it gently on a dry beach in the afternoon sun. The crushing external pressure vanishes. And what happens? The vessel, which was only coherent in relation to the force it was built to counteract, shatters violently from the inside out. It destroys itself, not because it was built poorly, but because it was removed from the precise conditions that gave its architecture meaning. Your body is that submarine, and Mars is the beach. Mars has 38% of Earth's gravitational pull. That number, when you first hear it, sounds almost reassuring. It sounds like less of a problem rather than more of one. 38% surely, that's enough to keep bones dense, muscles strong, and biological systems functioning? The science says otherwise. That number is not a compromise. It is a slow catastrophe written in the language of biology. The moment a human being stands on the Martian surface, something deeply consequential begins happening inside the body, not dramatically, not all at once, but with quiet, relentless biological efficiency. The body reads its gravitational environment the way a structural engineer reads a stress test. On Earth, with full gravitational load pressing down constantly, the biological signal is unambiguous. Build density, maintain bone mass, reinforce the geometry. The skeletal system responds accordingly. Bones are not the inert calcium structures we sometimes imagine them to be. They are living, electrochemically active tissues that continuously remodel themselves in direct mathematical response to the mechanical forces being placed upon them. Take away the gravitational load and the body draws the only conclusion available to it. The heavy architecture that was necessary on Earth is no longer needed here. And so, with perfect biological efficiency, it begins to dismantle that architecture. Calcium leaches from the bones at an accelerated rate. The protein responsible for maintaining bone mineral density, osteocalcin, begins losing the hormonal signals that keep it active. The internal scaffolding of the femur, the hip, and the vertebrae starts thinning in ways that are not gradual and ignorable, but measurable and alarming within just a few weeks. Astronauts aboard the International Space Station, operating in full microgravity with rigorous daily exercise protocols, can lose up to 1.5% of their bone density every single month. Mars is not microgravity, but it is profoundly insufficient gravity, and the biological degradation it produces, slower perhaps, but equally relentless, is a mathematical guarantee, not a theoretical concern. The muscular system follows the exact same trajectory. Every step you take on Earth, every time you rise from a chair, every unconscious postural shift your body makes across a 16-hour waking day constitutes a mechanical resistance workout for your muscles. Your legs, your back, your core are perpetually engaged in a low-level battle against gravitational force. That constant battle is precisely what maintains their mass and functional integrity. Remove the gravitational opponent, and the muscles begin to atrophy with a speed that would genuinely astonish you. The body has no reason to maintain tissue. It no longer needs to deploy. Then there is the cardiovascular system, and this is where the collapse becomes systemic. On Earth, your heart works constantly against the vertical column of blood pressure created by full gravitational pull. The walls of your arteries, the architecture of your vascular system, the intricate regulatory feedback loops of your blood pressure, chemistry, all of it is calibrated for a 1G environment. In reduced gravity, fluid distribution shifts dramatically toward the upper body and the head. The heart, receiving fundamentally different pressure signals, begins to restructure itself. The left ventricle, the chamber that does the heaviest pumping work in a normal gravitational environment, can lose measurable mass in a matter of months. This is not a temporary adaptation the body makes and then recovers from. It is a remodeling of cardiac geometry that in the long term compromises the fundamental efficiency of the organ keeping you alive. The biological submarine is already shattering, but gravity is only the first weapon the Martian environment deploys. If the story of Mars ended with reduced gravity, it would already be a sobering one. But there is a second chapter to this story, and it is written not in the physics of mechanical force, but in the chemistry of the ground beneath your boots. The soil of Mars, the regolith that covers its entire surface, is not simply cold, lifeless sand. It is not a neutral inconvenience you can brush off an airlock and dismiss. It is one of the most chemically hostile substances any human body could ever encounter. And understanding why requires a brief but important journey into soil chemistry. For billions of years, the Martian surface has been exposed to intense ultraviolet radiation with almost no atmospheric protection to filter it. Combined with highly oxidizing chemical conditions and the complete absence of liquid water to neutralize reactive compounds, this prolonged bombardment has produced a surface chemistry unlike anything found in significant concentrations on Earth. Martian soil is saturated with perchlorates, salts built around a chlorine atom bonded to 4 oxygen atoms in a precise geometric arrangement that makes them extraordinarily reactive with biological tissue. On Earth, perchlorates appear in certain dry desert environments at modest concentrations. Even at those modest levels, they are classified as serious environmental contaminants. The reason is specific and physiological. The human thyroid gland depends on iodine uptake to synthesize the hormones that regulate every major metabolic process in the body: energy production, temperature regulation, cardiovascular function, neurological activity, reproductive chemistry. Perchlorates compete directly with iodine for the exact same cellular uptake mechanism. They occupy the receptors. They block the synthesis. The thyroid begins to fail. Metabolism destabilizes. And the hormonal cascade that follows from that single failure ripples outward to touch virtually every organ system in the human body. Mars does not have modest perchlorate concentrations. Mars has perchlorates distributed across its entire surface layer at concentrations that would be considered catastrophically toxic by any standard used in terrestrial environmental science. And because the Martian atmosphere is so thin, so weak in its ability to hold fine particles close to the ground, that perchlorate-saturated dust does not stay put. It is electrostatically charged. It clings to every surface it contacts. It infiltrates materials with a chemical persistence that borders on aggression. Martian dust storms can blanket the entire planet for months, coating every exposed surface in fine, toxic particulate matter that works its way into every material seam, every imperfect seal, every microscopic gap in your habitat's skin. Now consider what this means inside the sealed environment where your crew lives and works. A habitat on Mars is, from a thermodynamic standpoint, a closed system. Matter cycles within it. Entropy accumulates within it. Every time an astronaut completes a surface excursion and returns through the airlock, some quantity of perchlorate-saturated dust enters the habitat with them. No decontamination protocol, regardless of its sophistication, achieves perfect filtration. No mechanical or chemical system eliminates every particle. The amounts entering may begin as negligible, but over weeks they become measurable. Over months they become significant. Over years, in a sealed environment with no capacity to flush the interior with clean external air, the perchlorate concentration inside the habitat rises with a slow, invisible, and mathematically inevitable certainty. The crew is not sheltering in a protective bubble. They are living inside a gradually concentrating chemical environment that is with perfect thermodynamic patience building toward toxic threshold levels. The habitat designed to protect them is simultaneously functioning as an accumulation chamber for the precise compounds most destructive to the biological systems it was meant to preserve. There is a law of physics that governs this accumulation, and it does not negotiate. The second law of thermodynamics states that in a closed system, entropy does not decrease, it increases. Disorder accumulates. What begins as a trace amount of contamination does not naturally resolve or dilute itself. It compounds, it builds, it moves steadily and irreversibly in one direction only. Every proposed engineering solution to the perchlorate accumulation problem carries its own thermodynamic cost. You can install filtration systems, but filtration systems degrade incrementally, require replacement components that must either be manufactured on-site or shipped across tens of millions of miles of interplanetary space, and consume energy in a closed system where energy is already a tightly constrained and precious resource. You can use chemical decontamination agents, but those agents themselves accumulate in the closed system, adding new chemical burdens to an environment already under stress. You can improve airlock design, develop better surface suits, engineer more effective dust barriers, and each of these approaches reduces the problem at the margins while leaving the fundamental thermodynamic trajectory unchanged. The second law does not care about engineering ingenuity. It enforces its conclusions with complete and absolute authority. So we now have a picture of the Martian environment that is something quite different from what most popular science communication would have you believe. This is not a world that is merely cold and inconvenient, the way a remote mountain peak is cold and inconvenient. This is a world where three distinct and fundamental physical forces, gravitational mechanics, reactive soil chemistry, and closed system thermodynamic entropy, have converged to produce conditions that are precisely, systematically, and comprehensively hostile to the sustained operation of a human biological system. It is as though the physics of Mars has been arranged, not by intention, but by the impersonal logic of natural law, to target every major vulnerability in human biology at exactly the same time. And this is the point where the conversation about Mars must shift its fundamental frame. Because when most people think about the challenges of Mars colonization, they think about engineering. They think about more powerful rockets, better heat shields, advanced life support systems, smarter habitat designs. Engineering is the language of the conversation, and that is exactly the problem. The challenge of sustaining human life on Mars is not primarily an engineering problem. It is a biological physics problem. It is the problem of attempting to operate a biological machine, one shaped across geological timescales, in one specific gravitational and chemical environment, inside a world where every major physical law accelerates that machine's structural failure. The calcium dissolving from your bones is not dissolving because of an engineering oversight. It is dissolving because the gravitational loading that kept it in place no longer exists, and your body is responding precisely as 4 billion years of evolution have programmed it to respond. The iodine receptors in your thyroid are being chemically displaced not because of a design flaw in your habitat, but because the soil chemistry of an entire planet has been producing perchlorates for billions of years, and the thermodynamics of your closed living environment guarantee their accumulation. The cardiovascular remodeling happening in the heart of every crew member is not a correctable side effect. It is the body doing exactly what bodies do when the physical environment around them changes fundamentally and permanently. These are not problems that a better engineering team solves. They are physical laws operating with their characteristic absolute and deeply impersonal authority. There is something deeply seductive about the way Mars looks through a telescope or a rover camera. Red mountains stretching to the horizon, dry river channels carved into ancient rock by water that flowed billions of years ago. A sky that shifts through extraordinary colors at sunset, colors that, in certain images, look almost like home. There are moments, looking at photographs taken by surface rovers, where Mars presents itself as something hauntingly familiar: a desert, a landscape, a place that a human eye can scan and process without alarm. That visual familiarity is perhaps the most dangerous illusion the universe has ever offered our species. Because at the level of gravitational mechanics and soil chemistry and thermodynamic physics, Mars is not a slightly colder Earth. It is not a harder version of the same problem. It is a world where the foundational conditions that make complex biological life possible are absent, not partially or temporarily, but structurally and permanently. The resemblance is cosmetic. The incompatibility is constitutional. Earth is what physicists and biologists would call a biological sanctuary, a world where an extraordinary convergence of physical conditions has made the sustained operation of complex life not just possible, but self-reinforcing. Earth's gravitational pull falls within the precise range that allows carbon-based biology to maintain structural coherence across an entire lifetime. The chemical composition of its soil is dominated by compounds that biological systems can metabolize, tolerate, and incorporate. The thermodynamic openness of Earth's biosphere allows entropy to be continuously exported into the surrounding environment rather than accumulating catastrophically within the living system. These features are not luxuries. They are not amenities that a sufficiently determined engineering culture can replicate inside a pressurized tent on another world. They are the foundational physical prerequisites for the continued operation of the biological machinery we call life. Mars offers none of them. Not the gravitational loading, not the chemical compatibility, not the thermodynamic openness. And the deeper we look into the physics, the more clearly the pattern emerges. This is not a checklist of fixable problems. It is a convergent physical reality. Mars is hostile to complex life in the same way that a vacuum is hostile to sound. Not because of a particular deficiency that could be corrected, but because the conditions under which the phenomenon operates simply do not exist there. And yet the story persists. The inspirational speeches continue. The timelines get announced and revised and announced again. Billions of dollars flow toward vehicles designed to cross the void, and the question of what happens to the biology on the other end is treated as a secondary engineering detail, something to be figured out once we get there, optimized in real time, solved by the same human ingenuity that solved the rocket equation. This optimism is not irrational in isolation. Human ingenuity is genuinely extraordinary. The history of technology is, in large part, a history of solving problems that previously seemed physically intractable. But there is a categorical difference between problems that yield to engineering and problems that are governed by physical law. No amount of engineering creativity has ever repealed the second law of thermodynamics. No material science breakthrough has ever changed the gravitational constant. No chemical innovation has ever redesigned the human endocrine system's response to perchlorate exposure. The story we tell about Mars colonization is seductive precisely because it casts the challenge in the language of the former category when the physics places it firmly and unambiguously in the latter. So where does that leave us? If the physics of Mars is this unforgiving, if the biological incompatibility runs this deep, does that mean the dream of becoming a multiplanetary species is simply over? Is the honest conclusion of all this science a closed door and a quiet resignation to a single world existence? The answer to that question is more nuanced than either the enthusiasts or the pessimists tend to acknowledge, and it requires us to be honest about exactly what kind of problem we are actually facing. The physical universe does not forbid human curiosity about Mars. It does not prevent our robots from rolling across the surface, drilling into ancient rock, and reading the chemical signatures of a world that was once, billions of years ago, a very different place. Robotic exploration of Mars is not just possible, it is actively producing some of the most important planetary science of our era, and there is no physical law that limits how sophisticated or how capable those robotic systems can become. The quarantine that physics has written into the laws of matter and energy is a biological quarantine. It targets the fragile, evolved, gravitationally calibrated, chemically sensitive architecture of organic life. Machines do not have bones to demineralize. They do not have thyroid glands to poison. They do not have cardiovascular systems to remodel. The red planet is not off limits to exploration. It is off limits to the particular form of exploration that requires a human being to stand on its surface and survive. Acknowledging that distinction is not defeatism. It is precision. And precision in a domain as consequential as space exploration policy and human safety matters enormously. The resources, the intellectual capital, the engineering talent, and the public excitement currently directed toward putting warm biological bodies on the Martian surface could instead be channeled toward questions that physics actually permits us to answer. What does the interior geology of Mars tell us about the early solar system? What chemical signatures in the ancient riverbed suggest about the conditions for early life? How did Mars lose its magnetic field and its atmosphere? And what does that tell us about planetary habitability more broadly? These are extraordinary scientific questions. They are questions that robotic systems are already beginning to answer, and that increasingly capable autonomous machines will answer with greater depth and precision in the decades ahead. And if the longer-term ambition genuinely is human habitation beyond Earth, not as a symbolic achievement, but as a practical strategy for the long-term resilience of our species, then the honest scientific conversation must begin with biology rather than rocketry. It must begin with the question of what the human body actually requires to maintain its structural and functional integrity across a lifetime, and then work backwards to identify which environments in the solar system come closest to providing those requirements. That is a different conversation than the one currently dominating the public imagination. It is a harder conversation, a less cinematic one, a conversation that does not easily fit into a launch event or a press release. But it is the conversation that physics is demanding we have. The question of human survival beyond Earth is not waiting for a more powerful rocket. It is waiting for a renegotiation with biology, with chemistry, with thermodynamics, with the foundational laws that govern whether a living system can persist in a given environment. And those laws, as they always have been, are not interested in our timelines, our inspiration, or our ambition. They are interested only in the numbers. If you found this video genuinely eye-opening, if it changed the way you think about Mars, about space colonization, or about the physical laws that shape what is and isn't possible for our species, then share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you want more science that cuts through the myth and gets to what the physics actually says. And drop a comment below. Do you think we'll ever solve the biological problem of Mars, or is the red planet destined to remain a world for machines? The conversation is just getting started.